Welcome to the Dawn to Dusk podcast with your host, Douglas Wood, author of From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. In each episode, Doug speaks with distinguished legal professionals who have mastered the intricacies of building a successful law practice and then transitioning to retirement or other fulfilling pursuits when the right time comes. Now, let's join Doug for today's insightful discussion.
I'm honored to welcome Lawrence Weinstein, a veteran commercial litigator whose career has spanned more than 4 decades at some of the nation's most prestigious law firms, Davis Polk, Paul Hastings, and Proskauer Rose, where he spent nearly 23 years as a litigation partner. At Proskauer, he co-headed both the False Advertising and Trademark Group and the Intellectual Property Litigation Group, guiding major brands through some of their most complex disputes. In 2022, Larry made the bold decision to step away from big law and launched Lawrence Weinstein Dispute Resolution Services, a practice dedicated to helping clients achieve successful and cost-effective outcomes through alternative dispute resolution and strategic counseling. Educated at Johns Hopkins University and the New York University School of Law, my alma mater, Larry began his legal career by clerking for the Honorable James Hunter III of the U.S. Court of Appeals of the Third Circuit. Over the course of his distinguished career, Larry became the go-to litigator in disputes involving false advertising, trademarks, and intellectual property. He and I had the pleasure of working on various cases over the years and getting to know one another in that career. His work has earned him numerous honors, including being named Advertising Lawyer of the Year by Best Lawyers in U.S. News and World Report in 2020. He is also an inaugural member of the U.S. Legal 500 Hall of Fame and has consistently achieved top rankings from Chambers USA in advertising litigation. In our conversation today, we'll explore Larry's story through the lens of Dawn to Dusk, how he built a distinguished career at the peak of commercial litigation, and what it means to transition into a new phase, defined not by competition, but by resolution. Welcome to the show, Larry.
Thanks very much, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, why don't we start right at the beginning and give us a little idea of, who's Larry and where'd you grow up and why'd you become a lawyer?
All good questions. So I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, and the suburbs. I was the son of 2 accountants. And one thing that I will note is that my parents met at work in the late 1940s. My father's education was interrupted by serving during World War II in the Flying Tigers for 4 years. And so he was a little late to start his career. And what made their pairing very interesting is not that they met at work, but that they met at work when my mother was my father's boss. That's something that most people who were born in the early 50s, as I was, don't share. You just didn't see that very often. But anyway, I grew up with 2 professionals as parents. And one thing that led me to the law was that I found accounting to be insufferably boring. And so I certainly didn't want to follow in my parents' footsteps. And then when I was in school, I was rather undistinguished in science, which actually is kind of weird because fast forward a while, the vast bulk of my practice was science-centered. And one of the interesting things that I did as a young lawyer was to learn how to learn about science and then to communicate it to judges and juries. But I went to undergrad, as you said, at Hopkins. I did graduate school in Washington at a Hopkins satellite campus and worked on Capitol Hill for 2 years. During Watergate. And I found the legal side of things to be fascinating. I really had little experience in law growing up. I had a grandfather who predeceased my birth, who had the distinction of being the youngest graduate in the history of the University of Minnesota Law School. But he, as an occupation, he owned a clothing store and never practiced law a day in his life. So I didn't have law experience in the family, and I really first encountered it during Watergate, working for my home state senator on Capitol Hill. And I found it fascinating, decided I would apply to law school as my graduation from graduate school neared, and wound up in New York City because NYU was the best school that I got into. It wasn't, I didn't make a city choice, I made a law school choice.
Mhm.
But then I fell in love with NYU and New York.
So, so at NYU, as you went through the programming, we both remember NYU well with its green walls and the Washington Park out front. And half the time I watch people playing chess while in between classes out there.
Right.
It was a great atmosphere. What did you turn to litigation then, or did you sort of grow into litigation after you
Not
practiced?
quite. So, I mean, law school anywhere can tend to cause people to lean towards litigation just because the curricula is more litigation centric than it is corporate or tax centric, unless you want to make your focus on the latter. I did very well in law school. I was on the law review, and several of my law review compatriots decided that they wanted to apply for judicial clerkships. That sounded like a lot of fun. And so I was able to get one with a wonderful judge who unfortunately died too young. His name was James Hunter. And he was a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. And so I spent my first year after graduating, clerking for Judge Hunter in Camden, New Jersey, and in Philadelphia, and watching people argue in court was a revelation to me. I saw, the great and the bad and everything in between. And one of the things that Judge Hunter did was help us after arguments not only decide the cases, but to dissect the performance of the lawyers who appeared before the court. And as I sort of observed people, I started thinking, not only could I do that, but that I'd really like to do it. And I sort of felt a flash that I would do it better than most of the people that I saw. And that, which was pretty arrogant since I'd never done it in my life at the time, but it just seemed like something that I really could gravitate to. Now, I didn't start as a litigator. My first job after my clerkship was at Davis Polk. And Davis Polk was and is a great firm. But back in the day, anyway, their litigation practice was what I would really refer to more as a litigation avoidance than actually going to trial. They represented virtually all defendants, and their job was to make litigation miserable for the plaintiff, so that the case would settle. And so I noticed even when I was a summer associate at Davis Polk before my clerkship, that very few people really had trial experience except for the very senior partners. And I thought, I don't think I want to do that. And I always liked business, so I decided to go into corporate at Davis Polk, and realized they had a great corporate practice, but it was a mistake for me. I wasn't suited to do that. And so I didn't think that switching to litigation at Davis Polk would be a great idea. And so I started looking at boutique firms in the city where I thought I might actually get litigation experience. And I found a wonderful one that you didn't mention, called Milgram, Tomajan, and Lee.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
famous.
long defunct, but I was an associate there for 6 years and then a partner there for 6 or 7 years before the firm broke up and a group of us went over to Paul Hastings.
So that's how you ended up at Paul Hastings. Okay, I didn't
Yeah.
know that. That's so you've been with some legendary firms. I mean,
Yes.
clearly legendary firms. And in the process, you obviously met some really big leaders and folks who really knew how to not only just represent their clients, but to practice a business and to build
Yes.
a law firm. Um, in that experience that you had before you, as you rose in the profession, became a leader yourself in two departments at Proskauer, what did you see in the leadership of those firms that impressed you the most?
So, uh, two things. Uh, Probably for me, the formative firm that I was at as a young lawyer was Milgram, Tomajan, and Lee. Um, for two reasons. One, extraordinarily positive, and the other, not so much. So the positive part was that Al Lee was probably the foremost or one of the foremost trademark lawyers of his generation. And Roger Milgram was, without any doubt, the most prominent, most famous trade secrets lawyer in the country at the time. And the book he wrote, Milgram on Trade
Right.
Secrets, is still, a major book in the field. And so I learned as a young associate working for the two of them what true expertise was. And that, people style themselves as experienced or expert in certain fields. And a lot of the time, they truly aren't. The ones who are most successful, it seemed to me, were people who really had mastered their field. And so that was a tremendous um, motivating force for me as I developed as a lawyer, and that was sort of my lodestar to try and develop a lot of expertise in a field or fields.
You not only developed, obviously, to one of the stellar litigators, particularly in the IP area in the nation, but in that process of learning and becoming the expert that you were, somewhere in there, you also had to mix in building the business, to bring in the business and find the clients. And I suspect that Lee and others at that firm were very good at that because it was an entrepreneurial, smaller firm where there's a bigger focus sometimes on business development than there might be at the bigger law firms that tend to be more institutionalized. What were your techniques? If you were giving advice to young lawyers today, young, associates or young partners on developing business, what would your advice be?
There are so many ways to develop business that I think a major key is to first learn how people in your firm have developed business, and then pick a path or a couple of paths, but not all of them, that you are most interested in and that you think you might be good at. I don't mean to say this in any sort of a negative way, but there are people, one of my closest friends, at multiple of my law firms, developed a lot of business on the golf course. Um, uh, he was a great golfer. I most certainly am not. Um, and he also was an amazing raconteur. And so he would find clients at dinners and on the course. That wasn't me. It didn't work that way for me. So one way that I found that it really worked, and I don't mean to sound unhumble, But I did see with Roger and Al as sort of examples that if you were the best at something or one of the best at something in a country, in the country, that work would come kind of naturally that way. And at least in my younger years, that's really how I got most of my business. It wasn't by marketing, it was by word of mouth. Um, that, of course, was during the time when you and I were young lawyers, Doug. Marketing, at least at any of the firms that I was at, was not something that people really talked about. You didn't have, in-house marketing professionals who would help you or guide you. The internet didn't exist yet. So you know, just becoming really, really good and being out there and having your cases published was a good way of getting new clients. And of course, a maxim that I learned when um, uh, I was young is that the easiest clients to get are the ones you already have. And so I did find that when I would get a client and I would win a case or win three cases or settle a case that they thought that they were going to lose on very good terms, that would ensure that I would continue to get, more business from the client. And I'm happy to say that my largest early client, um, uh, the one that I did most of my work for in the early 80s, is a client that went with me at all of my post-Davis Polk law firms, Milgram, Paul Hastings, and then Proskauer, and is still a significant Proskauer client 5 years after I left. And so I kept the client and successfully transitioned the client.
You make a very interesting point that an observation that I've made, and this may sound a little pompous in the context of the marketing arena, but you're right. When you and I were younger lawyers, there was no marketing. You couldn't advertise as a lawyer in those days. This is
Right.
before Jacoby and Myers even had the right to advertise. So you had to be good. You had no choice but to focus in on your expertise and find out where your niche was going to be and be the best you could possibly be at it. And then, the old, field of dreams, if you could get the word out and you showed that reputation, the work would eventually come to you.
Right. If you build it, they will come.
Well, exactly, exactly. Then we went through the transition, 20 years into our practice where marketing became something that law firms looked at significantly and started hiring marketing managers and all that kind of stuff. And the internet came along and I sometimes lament that I think the profession to some degree with younger attorneys has morphed not from being really good at what you do first, but instead being very good at marketing what you claim to do. It's really sort of, I think, in some ways turned it upside down, and that as a result, you cross. I mean, I don't mean to sound again pompous, but as my career progressed, and I would see mid-level lawyers below me, they were not nearly as good as their marketing said they were. That was kind of a
A
downside.
100%. And honestly, that was a frustration to me because I, like most good litigators, I am a very competitive person at heart. I want to win at Wordle. I want to win at spelling bee. I want to win at sports. I want to be the smartest, the funniest. That's what, so I'm very competitive. And once I realized that we all have to start marketing, I, embrace that fully. But I have to tell you with all honesty that even after doing it for decades, I never was able to predict when the next case would come. As you know, because you actually invited me to speak at many different conferences over the years, I did that a lot. I was, at the Association of National Advertisers, at the NAD conference, all the major conferences in our field. I was a very regular speaker, as were you. And but looking back on how, and I spent a lot of my marketing time doing that. How many clients did I get because of that directly? Very few, to be honest. And I don't think it was because I wasn't good at it. I think I was pretty good at, that kind of speaking. But there's no direct correlate. I was out there. Okay. So probably I got cases over the years because I came to mind with the people who are looking to hire,
You know,
a lawyer for my
you,
case.
your point there, I think, is really important for the for listeners to understand, and that is that you're not going to necessarily when you go out and you try to market your practice, you're not going to get immediate returns. It's not something that you go out and you do a speech or you write an article or whatever you do. All of a sudden, you're going to get somebody knocking on your door. It's the process of building your brand, and over
Yes.
time, that's little things here, little things there. And I often say to the younger attorneys that when you walk out of law school and go into whatever you're going to go into, law firm, government, whatever, you're a commodity. And a lawyer is a commodity throughout their entire career unless they build a brand, unless they come up above the masses. And
Right.
you do that over a long-term commitment and plan to do it, whether it's public speaking, and you were a great public speaker, obviously, or writing and all the other things. You build that reputation over time. Those who have the patience to do that are the ones who, over that time frame, do in fact succeed. You've seen it countless times. Those who don't, who are just kind of, they're going to become these so-called grinders, the ones who are just busting their ass forever and really not, getting to where they want
Yeah,
to be.
I mean, for sure. And so th I guess when I retired, I realized that I had never learned if there was some, I mean, obviously I was good at bringing in business, but I never understood the secret of it other than
Yeah.
Probably, I mean, for sure, other people in our field, Doug, and I still have them in mind, promoted themselves much more than you or I did
Right.
without being as good as you and I were. That's a fact. Whether that whether that ever came home to roost with them, with clients coming to the realization that the emperor was not fully clothed, I can't say. I really have no idea. Um, I do know though, because I still keep up with the field. I transitioned my practice some years ago now to two of my younger colleagues, both of whom are very successful partners at Proskauer and who are going about maintaining and building the business in all the right ways. It does seem to me that in our field, most of the best lawyers today, now that we have essentially left it, are really, really good at what they do, but not everybody.
Well,
Marketing.
I mean, I know that, you and I have one thing in common, and that is that we transitioned a relatively sizable practice to younger people who worked for us and with us over the course of our career.
Right.
And like you, I'm very proud of the fact that those who I delegated to are thriving partners in their own law firms now with really nice pieces of business, and like to think I helped contribute to that a bit. On the other hand, what you see often is the lawyers who don't transition, who don't acknowledge the need to do so. I jokingly say, sooner or later we all reach our use by date, and if we
Yeah.
don't figure out how we're going to deal with that by transitioning, we're really doing a disservice to everybody involved. But I don't mean again to sound egotistical, but what you did and what I did, that's the exception, not the rule. Most often you see when a lawyer who had a reputation sort of vanishes, then their practice disintegrates and it's like it's dispersed all over the place, and there's really no identity anymore. It's kind of a different process that goes through transitioning. So I think a lot of it is that sometimes transitioning is without a plan. And you had a plan when you transitioned. I had a plan when I transitioned, and that was what made you do the right thing for the people that help you get there. It's a pay it forward kind of thing,
It
which
very
is,
much
is
so.
really, really incredibly important.
Yeah.
So you talked about the transitioning. So let's go to when you decided that at some point, after more than 4 decades in litigation, you decided it was time to move on, to leave the big law context of where you were. Was that decision something that was gradual, or did you have an epiphany one day, or how did that come about that you made that decision?
Neither, and the in your introduction of me, the only word that I would take issue with was you described my transition as bold, and it wasn't. Uh, Proskauer is one of those large firms that has mandatory retirement for partners. And there is a fixed year in which partners are generally required to retire. There are occasions, and I was one of them, where the firm asked me to stay on a bit longer to help, continue the transition of my practice. And because I was a recognized name, but those um, extensions are very limited. And so I knew this is nothing new. This is part of the, this sort of partnership commitment. I knew many years before I retired when I was supposed to retire. And so one of the things that fascinates me is how much many partners at the firm left kicking and screaming, in a way, because that was really the only thing professionally that they wanted to do. I thought so. I had the luxury, in my view, of having years and years to kind of plan what I wanted to do next. And that brings me back to my clerkship. I thought that clerking for a federal appellate judge was the coolest thing in the world. I loved it. Um, I had an early career goal of being a judge, a federal judge, but two things came into play there. One is that I couldn't afford it when I was younger because I had three children that I was supporting. And by the time I could afford it, the dynamic of the age at which federal judges were appointed had changed. And so I was too old by the time that I could afford to do it. So at that point, I started thinking, since I can't be a judge, is there something I could do that would be as fun as being a judge? And in the course of my litigation career, I had arbitrations and I had many, many mediations as an advocate. And I thought, wow, that would be a cool thing to do. And I had two mentors, one who was a friend of mine, who was a retired federal judge, and another who actually had been one of my associates and left Proskauer at a relatively young age to become a full-time advocate and mediator. Both of them had become very, very successful, and I used them as sort of sounding boards as to how to do it.
So when you made this decision to move on, you don't you say it's not bold, but it is bold in many ways because you planned it out, and I agree with
Sure.
you that Reed Smith had the same provision, same kind of provision. When you in the year you turn 70, you're de-equitized. Although they
Yeah.
didn't have you could hang around as long as you produce something, they pay you for it. But but they also had that a lot of, as you know, a lot of larger law firms have that kind of mandatory
Yeah. Yeah.
exit kind of thing. But it always amazed me that a lawyer would be surprised that they got the letter. I had partners of mine who would go, I got the letter today. I'm de-equitized. What happened? Like, so did you ever read the partnership agreement? Did you ever understand what it said there?
Yeah. Right.
So in many ways, it is bold that folks like you saw it and you planned for it, and because so many don't do that, and it's really sad sometimes the stories that you see, because you're right about lawyers is that we have we get too caught up in our careers. That's all we think about. That's all we think we can do, and we don't have any diversions or whatever else we're going to do. So if suddenly someone says, "Hey, Doug or Larry, it's sayonara, have a nice day," it reminded me of the movie Judge Dredd, which is one of the most horrible movies ever made. But it's a where they take the judges and they at a certain age they send them out to the cursed earth. They open the walls of this walled city and they say goodbye, judge, and the judge walks off into the wilderness and God knows what happens to them. That's kind of what, when a lawyer gets to the point where this mandatory retirement, it's like time to go for the cursed earth and goodbye, go wherever you're going to go. So you had a plan though, which was obviously a key to continuing your sanity, if nothing else, in terms of moving forward. But as you did, a couple of questions to this joining questions to some degree. One is that as a litigator, because I couldn't be a litigator. I just thought their lives were insane. That they would go from highs to lows to this, then busy to not busy to craziness to insanity, weekend shot, everything else. So I did not have.
You thought right.
Yeah, yeah, right. So I said I can't be a litigator. How did when you were really at your top speed? How did you balance you had three kids, you had a family life. How did you find the work-life balance? How did you maneuver that?
Well, I had an incredibly patient wife. Um, I also was living in sort of the distant suburbs, which was sort of nuts. I didn't sleep a lot. Um, I kind of learned how to just be calm through, which actually was quite a skill. It was really my magic act that I didn't get too nervous when it came to litigating. I
Mhm.
always talked things through with my wife, and she was extremely supportive. And so, uh, looking back on it, I sometimes wonder how I did it, but it didn't seem all that stressful at the time. And, I would be sometimes away for 6 weeks or, trying a case because I tried cases all over the country. And, I missed my kids, I missed my family, but it's just something that I did and it didn't bother me that much. An interesting thing is that one of my and I don't think my kids, who I'm very, very close to, had negative reactions about what I did. Only one of my three is a lawyer, but he's a homicide prosecutor. And so he kind of got you know, he got the excitement of litigation, the thrill, the roller coaster ride of that, and chose that for his career. My other two, went as far away from it as possible. But uh, I don't know if that answers your
No,
question.
it does. I mean, I always admired litigators for a number of reasons. One was their ability to learn something so quickly and learn it very deep and then forget it next week because they had a new case come on
Oh
and
yeah.
they had to learn something else. They were the masters of so many different things, and that always admired. And the other was just like you say that somehow they found balance. They would be away for 6 weeks, and I used to have partners who would, they go flying all over the place and everything so that they had the family life and also took care of the cases and the clients. And I always marveled at how litigators were able to do that. I was just that's and I used to say, thank you, I'm still a transactional lawyer. And I used to always, you remember Peter Raymond, my partner,
Yeah, sure.
was a litigator and did the same kind of cases you did. I was always happy to be stated to Peter, I'm the one who screws it up so that you can fix it. That's your role as a litigator. So here it is, go fix it, Peter. That was the kind of the world we lived in those days. So when you made this transition, you went from the high pressure of Proskauer and you had an active practice and you had you were transitioning over some period of time. Um, what surprised you most about leaving there? And did you miss any of it? What were the surprises you had when you started off in this new
So
chapter?
I don't miss practicing. I did it and loved it for, over 40 years. And but did not go kicking. I did not leave Proskauer kicking and screaming. I left it with a real sense of job well done. Now it's time to move on to something else. I miss the sort of daily contact with my partners and colleagues, but I still have it a lot. I still see my closest friends um, at the firm. I'm kind of a loyalist. My high school crowd of people who I've now known for almost 60 years, most of them became lawyers as well. And we still have quarterly Zoom calls. I mean, I keep my friends. And so I've kept my Proskauer friends. Don't see them as much as like, but I see them a lot. So I don't miss it. It was a wonderful firm and a wonderful experience, but I don't miss doing it. Um, I had enough experience acting as first chair lawyer in arbitrations and other alternative dispute fora, and also advocating in mediations, that when I started on the mediator and arbitrator side, it wasn't strange to me. Um, I was sort of warned by everybody that it would take years to start getting cases. And maybe because that turned out not to be true, I actually started getting them right away. And I think what probably happened was that everybody who either was involved in choosing me or appearing before me perceived me as somebody who was extremely comfortable in the role. And so I've gotten a lot of repeat business.
Hmm.
For example, I a number of very large companies have selected me as an arbitrator over and over again, even when I've ruled against them in some of the cases, because I think they just view me as fair. And also sort of interestingly, I've had some cases where I had previously represented one or even both sides. And you obviously you have to disclose all that totally when you're first asked to take on the matter. It would be,
Right.
reversible error if you didn't do that. And so I do that, to a fault. But I've been shocked how frequently firms where I was an adversary against them or a client, either one or both, have selected me. The only thing I won't do at all is I won't take any case in which Proskauer is involved. Even if the parties didn't mind, I wouldn't do that.
Your observation there, Larry, I think is really important. It kind of gets back to something we said earlier that, I suspect that you're getting the business that you're getting because you're very good at what you do. And so often people think that the way I'm going to get the business is first to be out there marketing and putting my name out there in ads and all these other kinds of things. And not necessarily making sure that I'm the best there is at what I do. And that discipline, as I said earlier, lamenting that I think that discipline with some young lawyers is beginning to wane. And that's very unfortunate. Being down here in North Carolina, I see all too many lawyer ads that I want to just, scream at, well, where's the expertise, whatever it is, but it is what it is. So to conclude, let me ask you sort of a broad question. You've had an incredibly successful career, developed a big book of business, transitioned it on, went on to your second chapter. For lawyers beginning in the practice and lawyers who are looking at the time for transition, what would be the general advice you'd give them?
Think about it a lot. Think about the things that you like to do in life, professionally, um, and make a plan, realizing, the phrase, man plans, God laughs, but make a plan and try as hard as you can to stick to it. You're always juggling. And actually, one of the luckiest things you can do in life when you reach our age, when you reach quote unquote retirement age, is to have a lot going in your life to juggle. And so you've got to be good at juggling. And you also have to, I think, in the end, be very tolerant and patient of yourself because whether you're practicing law or in a post-law career, juggling's hard, and you do the best that you can to do well in all of the facets of the life you choose to live.
That couldn't get better advice than that. And obviously you've been there, done that, and a great example of how that kind of planning really succeeds in the end of the day. Thank you very much, Larry, for being on the podcast. I'm sure that the viewers and listeners will really get some great insight. And I wish you the best. And your arbit if I need an arbitrator, you're the guy I'm going to turn to because I know you're the best. So thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Doug. It was a pleasure to speak with you and to I hope what I've had to say will be beneficial to your listeners.
It will be.
Thank you for joining us on the Dawn to Dusk podcast. You can learn more on building and transitioning a multi-million-dollar law practice in Doug's book, From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. If you're interested in working with Doug, suggesting future guests, or have questions you'd like Doug to ask guests in upcoming episodes, reach out to him at douglas.wood@wood.law or visit his website at dawntodusk.wood.law. And if you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your peers. Until next time, we appreciate your viewership. Thank you for joining us on the Dawn to Dusk podcast. You can learn more on building and transitioning a multi-million-dollar law practice in Doug's book, From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. If you're interested in working with Doug, suggesting future guests, or have questions you'd like Doug to ask guests in upcoming episodes, reach out to him at douglas.wood@wood.law or visit his website at dawntodusk.wood.law. And if you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your peers. Until next time, we appreciate your viewership.